You know, it is kind of funny how we look at everyday objects. Like if you hold a piece of plastic in your hand, maybe an old CD-ROM or, I don't know, USB drive, you just see office supply.
Right, exactly. It is
Yeah.
basically just a digital chore, a totally neutral artifact sitting on your desk, just waiting for someone to double-click it and scroll through some text.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It is just a mundane piece of technology holding a PDF file.
Hmm.
Maybe it contains your tax returns or a mundane medical record. To you and me, it is completely ordinary,
Sure.
right?
But the context is everything,
It
though.
really is. Because what if you looked at that exact same mundane object and instead of a boring PDF, your brain saw a literal life or death map?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
What if the thick black bars of a redacted government document were not just censorship to you, but actual tactical coordinates holding the key to your survival?
It is wild to even try to wrap your head around that.
It really is. So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are so thrilled to have you with us as we unpack a psychological landscape that is incredibly complex, deeply surreal, and honestly, just heartbreaking.
Yeah, heartbreak is definitely the right word for it.
Right. Today, we are exploring the reality of a military veteran whose physical environment and mental state have entirely merged into one.
And we are pulling our insights today from a forensic reconstruction. It is titled The Tularosa Perimeter by Brian Scott.
Which is a fantastic piece of work.
It really is. And our lens today is focused strictly on the first section of this work, which is part one, the static defense.
So the mission of this deep dive is to basically trace the origins of a man's dual traumas. We are talking physical and psychological trauma.
Right. And we need to figure out how they culminated in this terrifying, just completely surreal climax decades later.
Exactly. We want to understand how a man named Alexander Thorne ended up completely trapped. And not just inside his own mind, but literally trapped inside his own house.
Yeah, it is a literal fortress.
So let's start by dropping you into Alamogordo, New Mexico, present day.
Okay, so for context, Alamogordo sits right in the high desert down in the Tularosa Basin. It is a very quiet, sun-baked landscape.
It's just a standard desert town. And sitting on a corner lot in that town is a house at 501 Lover's Lane. It was built back in 1956.
So it is just a single-story stucco building, right?
Yeah, exactly. If you were driving past it on a Tuesday afternoon, it wouldn't even register.
It just blends right in.
Right. But to Alexander Thorne, he doesn't live in a home. He occupies a hardened structure. He has spent years mapping this completely mundane corner lot into a highly specific defensive grid.
And the documentation of how he maps his property is just, well, it is a textbook example of how severe trauma dictates geography.
Yes, geography is the perfect word there.
Right, because in Thorne's mind, the property line is divided into strict military zones. He actually refers to the front yard as the desert front.
Which sounds like a landscaping choice, but it is not.
No, not at all. He keeps it clear of debris, large bushes, or any obstructions, specifically to maintain clear fields of fire.
Wow, and then you have the backyard, right.
Yeah, which he calls the grass rear. And this is the only space on the entire property that he allows himself to view as a sanctuary.
So it is kind of like a safe zone.
Exactly. It acts as a sort of psychological buffer zone where the invisible war he is constantly fighting pauses, just long enough for him to catch his breath.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. Because Thorne is treating a suburban corner lot the exact same way a medieval king treats a castle with a moat and a keep.
That is a really good analogy, actually.
Right. I mean, the front yard isn't there for curb appeal or property value. It is a kill zone.
Yeah.
And the interior of the house, it is just as rigorously controlled. Like, he requires visitors to let him sit in back corners with his back firmly pressed to the wall.
He has to see all the exits.
Always. He can't even go to the grocery store alone.
Yeah.
And the most striking detail to me, honestly, is that the silence inside that house is a total illusion.
Right. What's fascinating here, and horrible, really,
Right.
is the contrast. To anyone else standing in his living room, it is dead quiet.
You could hear a pin drop.
Exactly. But Thorne's reality is dominated by a severe form of tinnitus. He describes it as a constant, cicada-like shriek that rivals the decibel level of a jet engine.
A jet engine inside his own head. That is, I mean, I can't even imagine.
It is agonizing, and the biological mechanism behind this is fascinating and awful. When someone is exposed to extreme, continuous environmental trauma, the tiny hair cells in the inner ear are completely destroyed.
So the ear just stops working properly.
Right. The brain stops receiving acoustic signals from the outside world. But instead of accepting the silence, the brain's auditory cortex basically panics.
It just freaks out and makes its own noise.
Exactly. It artificially generates a high-pitched shrieking sound to fill the void, It isn't an external noise at all. It is a permanent neurological scar.
Man, that is intense. And, the only things tethering him to reality in that house are his two dogs. He has a yellow lab named Tiger and a Staffordshire Bull Terrier named Sarah.
But they aren't just pets to him, are they?
No, not at all. There is an early warning system. The book mentions that he literally whispers to them, "We're clear," like they are his squad mates clearing a room.
It just shows how trauma of this magnitude completely rewires the brain's survival systems. The dogs serve as functional assets.
Right, because he is exhausted.
Yeah, his brain is stuck in a permanent state of hypervigilance. So he has actually offloaded some of that scanning responsibility onto the animal's acute hearing and smell.
That is wild.
And his daily routine revolves around this system. The reconstruction notes how he views simple chores, like cleaning up the yard after the dogs, as small wins.
Just picking up the yard is a victory.
When your nervous system is burning that much energy, just anticipating a threat, lethargy becomes a massive risk. Picking up after the dogs is a tactical victory against that lethargy.
So his home isn't just a house, it is a literal manifestation of his hypervigilant nervous system.
Exactly.
So if you look at a man sitting with his back against the wall, hyper-fixating on his front lawn, it begs a massive question.
Why does he need an early warning system in a quiet New Mexico town?
Right. And to understand that, we have to transition away from 501 Lover's Lane and travel back in time. Because this defensive posture didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, creeping invasion of his biology.
And the origin of his physical decay starts in August 1993. We move to Lucky Base, Saudi Arabia, during Operation Desert Falcon.
So we're shifting from the New Mexico desert to the Saudi desert.
Right. Alexander Thorne is a young private first class serving with the 16th Engineer Battalion. And the environment is instantly hostile, but it is not the kind of hostility you expect in a war zone.
Right, because the heat is oppressive, obviously. But the real threat is coming from the sky.
Yeah.
The reconstruction describes the sky over the base as a bruised purple. And I was reading this thinking, why on earth is the sky purple?
And the answer is the burn pits.
The burn pits, yeah.
The logistics of keeping thousands of troops in the desert generate mountains of waste. And the military solution at the time was to dig massive open-air pits and just burn everything. We're talking about plastics, medical waste, batteries, uniforms, unexploded ordnance, all doused in jet fuel and set on fire.
That sounds like a toxic nightmare.
It was, and Thorne's daily duty often involved standing near these massive pits with a shovel.
There's this incredibly dark exchange he has with another soldier, a specialist, Miller. Miller looks up at this toxic smoke plume and jokes that it is the smell of freedom. Or cancer. Probably cancer.
A little morbid humor there.
Yeah. And Thorne has this moment of clarity where he realizes the absurdity of it all. Because the Gulf War is technically over at this point.
Right.
They are out in the desert building bunkers for a conflict that has already ended. And he describes them as just janitors with rifles.
Janitors with rifles, wow. And that dark humor masks a horrific biological reality. Let's look at the mechanism of what is happening to him in that moment.
Yeah, let's break that down.
Every time Thorne takes a breath of that bruised purple air, he is inhaling a microscopic particulate haze. These aren't natural dust particles. He is breathing in aerosolized plastics and heavy metals.
Just floating in the air.
Exactly. When those microscopic shards enter the lungs, they lodge deep inside the alveoli, the tiny air sacs responsible for exchanging oxygen.
Okay.
The body's immune system sends macrophages to consume the invaders, but biological cells cannot digest burned Kevlar or Teflon.
Oh, man, of course they can't.
So the immune cells die, forming microscopic layers of scar tissue. Every single breath he takes near that pit is permanently shredding his lung capacity.
That is terrifying.
It is. This exact moment in 1993 plants the seeds for a 100% disabling case of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD. He is slowly suffocating, decades before he ever reaches that New Mexico living room.
Here is where it gets really interesting to me. When we think of combat trauma, we have been conditioned by movies to think of kinetic events.
Right, the explosions.
Exactly. We think of sniper fire, ambushes, or massive IEDs. But the foundational danger for Thorne wasn't a bullet. It was literally the ambient air he was forced to breathe while taking out the trash.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we see the cruel irony of modern warfare. The trauma isn't always a kinetic event. Sometimes it is a particulate haze that acts as a slow detonating time bomb inside the respiratory system.
A slow detonating time bomb.
And the damage wasn't isolated to his lungs either. While he is standing by that burn pit coughing up black soot, Thorne turns to Miller and asks if he hears a high-pitched ringing sound.
And Miller hears absolutely nothing.
Nothing at all, because the ringing is entirely internal. It is the very first whisper of that cicada song.
Wow, so it started all the way back then.
Yeah, the microscopic blood vessels in his inner ear are likely being starved of oxygen or damaged by the toxicity. The neurological decay has officially begun.
So Saudi Arabia is the slow burn that destroys his physical body. But his lungs failing doesn't entirely explain the psychological fortress he built in Alamogordo.
No, it doesn't.
To understand the hypervigilance, we have to look at his next deployment, which provided an acute, bone-chilling terror that permanently fractured his psyche.
So we jump forward 2 years to December 31st, 1995. The climate shifts dramatically here. We leave the desert heat and plunge into the freezing, miserable Balkan winter in Bosnia-Herzegovina.
This is Operation Joint Endeavor, right?
Exactly. Thorne is now attached to Task Force Volturno.
And the mission described here is terrifying. They are tasked with crossing the Sava River. It is a swollen, freezing, muddy artery of water that separates Croatia from Bosnia.
It is an incredibly dangerous crossing.
The engineers have pushed a massive 2,113-foot pontoon bridge across the river. And Thorne is sitting in the driver's seat of a heavy armored vehicle, staring across this massive expanse of metal floating on rushing water.
And this is exactly where the psychological trauma crystallizes. Over the radio, his superior, Sergeant Kowalski, gives him an order that will echo in his head for the rest of his life.
Trust the tread.
Trust the tread. Kowalski warns him that they are proofing the route, meaning they are the first heavy vehicles testing the path.
Basically the guinea pigs.
Yeah. If Thorne deviates even 6 inches from the exact center line of that bridge or the muddy bank on the other side, he will find a mine.
Yeah.
And if he finds a mine, the entire crew goes home in body bags.
Wait, I read this section about the NATO clearance rates for those minefields, and it said they had a 99.6% clearance rate.
Right.
Now, to a civilian like me, 99.6% sounds like an A+. That sounds incredibly safe. Why would a 99.6% clearance rate break his mind?
This raises an important question about how the human nervous system processes the anticipation of death. Because the nervous system does not process statistics rationally when the stakes are absolute.
Okay, that makes sense.
A 99.6% clearance means that 0.4% of the ground is still hiding an unknown enemy mine threat. And that 0.4% is lethally unforgiving.
It is the great unknown.
Right. If you are baking a cake and you are 99.6% accurate with the ingredients, the cake tastes fine.
Yeah.
But if you are driving a multi-ton armored vehicle over ground laced with high explosives, that 0.4% is a guarantee of violent death if you happen to find it.
How do you function when you know that 0.4% of the ground you're driving on is lethal? I mean, think about it like playing Russian roulette, except the gun is the floorboards of your own vehicle.
That is exactly what it is like.
Like, think about how your heart races when you accidentally step off a curb you didn't see. Your body dumps adrenaline, your stomach drops, and you feel that rush of panic for maybe 3 seconds.
Yeah, it's that sudden jolt.
Now imagine that exact physical state, but sustained for the entire time it takes to slowly drive an armored tank across a 2,000-foot bridge, knowing that moving your steering yoke a fraction of an inch to the left means instantaneous death.
It is unbearable.
Your nervous system just isn't built to handle that level of sustained panic.
And the mechanism of trauma here is all about the anticipation of death. Think of the brain like a computer processing system. When you face a life-threatening event, your brain opens a high-priority background process to pump adrenaline and heighten your senses.
I'll keep you alive.
Exactly. But for Thorne, because the threat lasted so long and required such microscopic precision to survive, that background process got stuck at 99% CPU usage.
It just never turned off.
The physical explosion never came. Thorne physically drove across the Sava River and survived. But the screws tightened so hard on his psyche in that vehicle that a part of his mind never made it to the other bank.
Wow.
His nervous system permanently adapted to anticipate an explosion that never happened. This is the exact foundation of the agoraphobia that trapped him inside 501 Lover's Lane. He never stopped expecting the ground to detonate.
Which brings us to the collision of these two timelines. We have the physical suffocation, the lungs scarred by microplastics from the Saudi burn pits. And we have the psychological terror, the nervous system permanently stuck in survival mode from the Sava River Bridge. These two horrific traumas violently smash into his present-day reality on a specific day, January 19th, 2022.
The narrative shifts here from historical context to an active, immediate crisis. Thorne receives a package in the mail. It is a standard CD-ROM sent by the Department of Veterans Affairs.
Just a normal piece of mail.
Yeah, it contains his disability claims,
Yeah.
specifically the 188th General Dispensary Report. He puts it into his computer and opens it in a PDF reader.
Okay, I am struggling to fully grasp the mechanics of this part. I mean, I understand how a combat veteran might have a severe flashback if they hear a loud noise like a car backfiring or fireworks.
Like a sensory trigger.
Right, that makes sense. But Thorne is sitting in a quiet room looking at a completely silent PDF document on a computer screen. How does a digital redaction bar trigger a full-blown combat flashback?
It comes down to hyper-vigilant pattern recognition. The military spent years training Alexander Thorne to look for anomalies in his environment.
Anomalies, right?
A hidden mine is just a visual anomaly in the dirt. A slightly disturbed patch of soil, a wire reflecting light. His brain was trained that spotting anomalies equals survival.
Okay, I see where this is going.
So when he looks at the PDF, his brain isn't reading text. It is scanning the visual environment. When he sees the thick black redaction bars on his medical file, his compromised nervous system interprets them as missing actors or hidden threats.
Oh, wow. And his wife, Maria, walks into the living room holding a basket of laundry, and she finds him having a severe physical reaction.
Yeah, it is terrifying for her.
He is literally vibrating in his chair, and his hands are moving in the air. The reconstruction notes he is mimicking the remote controls of an M60 Panther.
Right, and the M60 Panther is a remote-controlled mine-clearing tank that he operated in Bosnia. It uses a belly pack remote control with specific joysticks requiring fine motor skills.
So his muscle memory just takes over.
Completely. When Thorne sees a metadata tag left visible near one of the black redaction bars on the PDF, his brain processes that metadata tag as the visual anomaly. It is the wire sticking out of the dirt.
That is just heartbreaking.
His body instantly regresses to its 1995 combat state. His hands involuntarily start working the joysticks of an imaginary M60 Panther, trying to clear the digital minefield on his screen.
And Maria desperately tries to ground him. She says, "Alex, it's a PDF. You're doing the thing with your hands." She's trying so hard to pull him back to the living room.
But he's already gone.
Yeah. Thorne is staring out the window at the Tularosa Basin, his ruined lungs gasping for air, and he tells her that the CD-ROM is a map. He says he has found the extraction protocol.
He genuinely believes it.
He genuinely believes the disk contains physical coordinates to meet what he calls the redacted third party.
The psychological synthesis happening in his brain is devastating. His mind is trying to solve his decades-old trauma using the exact same tools that caused the trauma in the first place.
That is such a profound way to look at it.
The environment changed from a Bosnian river to a New Mexico living room, but the mission parameters never updated. His brain is applying mind-sweeping tactics to a digital document because, neurologically speaking, the threat never ended.
So what does this all mean? The contrast in that room is just shattering. Think about Maria's perspective.
Yeah, it is awful for her.
She is standing in her own home, holding laundry, watching the man she loves lose his grip on reality over a piece of plastic and a medical file. She sees profound suffering. But to Thorne...
To him, it is a lifeline.
Exactly. That piece of plastic is a lifeline. He believes, with absolute conviction, that he has finally found the tactical coordinates to extract himself from his own mind. He believes the bureaucracy of the war is finally giving him a way out.
And that is the tragedy of Alexander Thorne. The institutions responsible for his care are sitting in paperwork while his brain is demanding a medevac. You can trace a direct line from the particulate haze of the bruised purple sky in Saudi Arabia to the freezing, swollen waters of the Sava River, directly to the desert front and grass rear of 501 Lover's Lane. Those deployments were the architects that built the invisible walls around his property.
We so often think of military history as something that happens, gets recorded in a textbook, and then safely ends. We view it in the past tense.
Right, like it is over and done with.
Exactly. But for people like Thorne, the past isn't a memory you occasionally recall. It is an active, daily combat zone that you have to navigate just to survive a Tuesday afternoon.
The war didn't stay in the Balkans, and it didn't stay in the Middle East.
No. It followed him to New Mexico, and it moved right into his living room. It completely redefines the concept of a safe space.
It really does.
Because for you and me, safety is a locked door and a quiet room. But for Thorne, safety requires a clear field of fire and early warning dogs.
The physiological and psychological remapping of his world is total. The CD-ROM wasn't just a trigger. It was the inevitable collision of a body that can't breathe and a mind that can't rest.
Which brings me to a thought I really want you, the listener, to mull over today. We spent this time dissecting how Alexander Thorne's physical spaces perfectly reflect his deeply scarred internal state. His trauma dictated his geography.
Yeah, his inner world literally shaped his outer world.
So take a moment and look around the room you're sitting in right now. Look at the doors, look at the windows, look at how you have arranged your furniture. If physical spaces reflect our internal states, what invisible perimeters have you subconsciously built to protect yourself?
That is a great question.
And more importantly, from what? Sometimes the heaviest things we carry aren't visible on an X-ray. Sometimes the most dangerous minefield is the one hidden inside a mundane piece of plastic, just waiting for the right file to open. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We will see you next time.